Yeah, welcome back to me color grading my thesis project. My voice is still super screwed up because of that special virus that's been going around for 3 years. I feel mostly fine. I'm a little sweaty. But yeah, today we're actually going to do some proper, at least node stuff, if not color grading. I have a timeline open that I want to work on. Does this look familiar to anybody? This is Walter Vopato's node tree. I'll probably link his at least an explanation of him doing this in the notes below if I remember to. I'm going to try to use this. I've used different people's nodes trees over time. I like the system. I like the pattern. I think the biggest mistake you can make when you're starting a color grade, or if you're doing some sort of, compositing or something, anything that requires complexity, you need a system. And so I've tried different node tree systems. I'm not 100% familiar with Walter Vopato's node tree. I'm going to try it. I have it on my system, so I'm gonna give it a shot. If it works for me, it works for me. If it doesn't work for me, I'll probably adjust it or go to something else. But it does feel like an awful lot of nodes. It says it's 26, so I think it's 23 or 25 the way he has it. But I had to do a couple extra nodes. Yeah, I'm definitely not one of those who just does 3 nodes and then when something changes adds a node, because it's just not how to do it. When I'm sort of farting around on just goofy stuff, I'll just do however many nodes I think it's going to take. But when I'm actually doing a project, being organized is the name of the game. So let me sort of walk you through at least my interpretation of Walter Vopato's node tree. So this is the in point. This is the out points out there. Oh, that's cool. Okay. Anyway, there's the in point, and then it goes out. So it goes left to right, but also goes up to down. So the very first thing is this color space transform, which I'll talk about after I go through the rest of the node tree. I have a color trace transform on one end and a color trace space transform on the other end. That's what I do for every project. Yeah, I'll talk about it later. I like working in the Davinci wide gamut color space. So that's not a Walter Vopato, but the rest are. So he starts with a base grade. And then there's a noise reduction or dynamic range adjustment grade node. And then there's 3 rows. So 3 parallel rows. Basically, I would call like an exposure row, a curves row, and an anything else that you can't figure out row. I think that's even how I wrote it. I wrote it as exposure adjust, secondaries, and freebies. So exposure adjust, secondaries, freebies. There's a key pass, which I probably won't use much keying. There's a couple of things that I do have keys for. The next is OFX, which is like grain or, I don't even know what else. Any weird effects, but film grain mostly. Then there's the vignette and the outside of the vignette. So this is basically just a double node. You can even, if you wanted to be convenient about it, you could turn this into a compound node and just know that when you go in there, one side is vignette and one side is outside because they're doing the same thing. A camera angle is in reference to if there's just one camera angle that looks a little weird for some reason in a shot, that's where you do that node. And then he has another triple parallel, which is scene, which will be worked on a lot. Director of photography's node, which is irrelevant to me because it was us. And then the Hail Mary node, which is usually, I think it's described as like the producer's girlfriend had a note. So the idea is they can be turned on and off quickly, and then out to Davinci wide gamut color space. So the reason I have these bookends of color space transforms, and some people like to do it on the timeline level, I won't be doing that for a bunch of reasons. The main reason is, that's funny, this is great. That's not real. The main reason I do a color trace transform specifically is because I like working in a color space that I'm consistent in. And so most of the time, if it's just one camera, or if it's a small project, I'll work in whatever color space it is, as long as it's not the Rec 709 color space, because that's a small color space. So if it's like Blackmagic something, or if it's red or whatever, I'm happy to work in that color space. A lot of times you can just go in and you can tell in your color management what your color science is, and it can actually pick your color space for you, that whole thing. I'm manually doing it, so I'm not letting it change anything, specifically because I have different types of clips. I have a lot of log Blackmagic film Gen 1, and I have a lot of Rec 709 Sony baked in, very, very, fragile footage. And I have a frog in my throat. So, but for what I'm doing for consistency, like for instance, this is a Blackmagic design clip. So half these clips on here say Blackmagic, and half these clips say 000, and then a number. The ones that say Blackmagic are in log, and the ones that have 000s in front of them they're all in ProRes, but it's 8-bit Sony footage, and it's baked in. So for the Blackmagic ones, it's the same chart for both, the same graph for both, but the Blackmagic ones, the color space transforms are Blackmagic Film Gen 1, Blackmagic Design Film going to Davinci Wide Gamut, Davinci Intermediate, and then on the outside they all have, both Sony and Blackmagic have Davinci Wide Gamut, Davinci Intermediate to Rec 709 Gamut 2.4. So therefore, that's a lot of talking. The Sony's, it's the same tree, but the difference is, in theory, I don't have to do a color space transform because it's already in Rec 709, so it's going, out of Rec 709 into Davinci Wide Gamut, back into Rec 709 at the end. So in theory, I could just leave it at Rec 709, but I don't like trying to color Rec 709 as Rec 709 because even though technically I probably don't have any more latitude putting it in a different color space, I prefer to work in a unified color space. I prefer to work in the same color space for all my clips. In case I do something weird, I at least understand that that's not one of the variables that's going to trip me up when I'm having to troubleshoot later. I don't know if I explained that right. So yeah, so the Sony ones, the only difference is instead of the very first color space transform being Blackmagic to Davinci Wide Gamut, it's now Rec 709 to Davinci Wide Gamut. Does that make sense? Yeah, and that's really all I want to talk about that. Really, I think most of my energy initially is going to be to two nodes. Base node, which is the balance node. He's calling it base. I might change the name to balance, but basically it's just you're balancing the shot for what people have different interpretations of what balancing the shot is. I think of it as what is most true to what it looked like on the day. So this includes exposure, this includes contrast, this includes white balance. It's basically just, in the case of Rec 709, all the choices have been made for me, so there's basically nothing to do. I could do a little bit of color temperature change or a little bit of sort of a color adjustment if I want to, but again, the footage is so fragile, especially this early in the node tree, you could be asking for trouble. So, and then the other thing is the scene, which is the scene. In theory, I haven't decided yet whether or not the scene is going to be a shared node across the entire timeline. I think it will be. So let's pull up the light box. We'll put my head out of the way here. Hold on. There we go. I can put my head out of the way. So yeah, so here's the whole scene. I believe it's like 32, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 32, so it's 34 shots. About half and half Blackmagic and Sony. Honestly, even with just the color space transform on them for them all to be in the Rec 709 finishing spot, they look closer than I remember. I'm pretty impressed. Some of these are very much sunset orange, and and some of these are a little bluer, and part of that is the direction they were facing. Part of that was the sun. The sun was moving, so there's gonna be a lot going on. So there's gonna be some exposure changes. There's gonna be this is definitely, that needs an exposure change. That needs an exposure change. That's pretty sweet. That might be my hero shot, depending on where it sits. I would do this, which I think is the same shot actually. They just haven't sat down yet. This is that same shot. These walking talks, I'm not so sure about. That'll probably be my secondary hero shots. You always want to pick a hero shot, which is usually the main characters in it in sort of the close-up or so, the thing that's going to be most important for the audience to look at, which is usually the characters. That's the hero shot that I pick for every shot, or for every scene, and then you work out of that. So the wides basically have the highest chance of having errors and having things that can be sort of overlooked as just, it is what it is, whereas the hero shots, you kind of want to get right. But at the end of the day, it's always about story, and as long as it's edited correctly and written correctly and delivered correctly, dialogue-wise, you're probably okay. I gotta decide where I'm gonna put my giant head in this. I think I might shrink myself. down. We could do this. We could put myself in the gallery. There we go. So we'll move this over because we're not only going to use... Ah, man. So let's see. Okay, so... Is that the hero shot or is it this? It's this hero shot, right? But she's not looking up. Is she looking up in this one? No. Let's see if I can find... Is it this one? I want to be able to see enough of her face, but... Maybe this one. Yeah, it's got to be this. Okay, so this is our hero shot. And then this is the end. It's the same thing. Oh, I think that's the better one. Okay, so it's the very last one is our hero shot. So, it is Sony. I can tell by it says 0038 right here. So, good. That means we can't really mess with it. But the one right next to it is not Sony. So, so let's just, you know, let's get dirty with it. Let's actually try to mess with it a little bit. Let me put myself over here, and we'll put the... You know, we don't need that. I don't need to see the nodes that much. Yeah, okay. Something like that. I can even put myself way over in the corner, honestly. Overthinking it, you know? If you ever do that, it happens to me all the time. So I do like to have extra real estate because I like to compare a lot. One of the most common things I do is I select two, and then I go to the grid, and then I go to version, and then I go to selected clips, and then I can look at them. It's a similar thing to this, you know, before after of the gallery where you can sort of slide the thing, but it's different because it's not pulling from the gallery, it's pulling from the actual clips you've selected. So what I'm seeing, and we can hide the clips to make it even more obnoxious. First thing I'm seeing is there's a lot more contrast in the baked-in Sony footage. But as far as colors, I'm not so worried about it, honestly. I'm not as worried as I was. You can look at the colors here. Let's pop this out. That's what Sony 8-bit footage looks like on a vector scope. So skin tone line, yeah, those little chunks. That's Sony 8-bit footage. It is what it is. I can prove it by if I click on this, and then we just get rid of it. So we just have that. Steps are gone because it's 10-bit footage. So just something to know. There's other ways to find out if it's 8-bit. You can actually, if you really need to clinically know, you can just look in the file, but you can also just look at information and it'll say 10-bit. But like I said a minute ago, or maybe I didn't, this has been transcoded, so it's all in ProRes, even though the Sony stuff is still 8-bit, but it says 10-bit, but it's not. So it's definitely not. Which it is what it is, you know. You work with what you got. So let's see what we can do with this Blackmagic footage to get it looking in good shape compared to. Normally I would just try to balance it, but I don't hate this Rec 709. It's a little underexposed, but I don't really have much of a problem with it. I think her skin tones are fine, which would be a real concern. They're a little magenta, so maybe I could, but are her skin tones here a little magenta too? Yeah, not really. Okay, so yeah, maybe we'll try to eyeball it, because this is one of those projects that definitely, I think the eyeball science is more effective than the regular science. So let's add just a little bit of contrast and see what that does for us. I'm going to pull up my parade so I know. A little bit of contrast. He's looking better. We're sort of losing exposure a little bit, but that's okay. But we're definitely too blue. So let's just warm it up with temperature a little bit. See what that does. Actually, her shirt, the matching of her shirt is a little bit more challenging, I think, but also the sun's not hitting it there where it looks like it's hitting it there. I'm kind of okay with what I'm looking at here. You know, I think I went a little bit too far, maybe that, but I don't hate that. Let's look at the vector scope. Yeah, I mean, we can do qualifiers. We can look at her magenta. It's right on the magenta spot, and then if we go over one, I mean, I don't hate that. I gotta say, I'm pretty okay with that. Is that good enough to move on from? Honestly, it might be. It actually looks like the exposure might be better here. One of the other things is the exposure of the wides, not nearly as important as the exposure of the tights, which is why if you've worked on a film set, usually they set up and light the wide first, and when they go in for the tight, usually the gaffer and the director of photography, they adjust the lighting a little bit to make it a little bit more, you know, controlled, a little bit more specific to really make the actors pop. Because, well, first of all, it's hard to light a wide. You need more lights, and it takes a long time to adjust lights and control lights, especially in a wide. Whereas in a tight, you're looking at less, your field of view is tighter, so you can focus on that, but you also have more control because you can bring the lights closer. It's a whole thing. So, you know, I have crazy respect for especially like stage lighting, like multicam lighting, because they're just lighting wides constantly. And if you see some of those setups, they're absolutely just bonkers how elaborate they are. This is not that. This is the opposite. This was sunset. This is all ambient light. We might have a bounce. I can't tell because I can't really see their eyes, but there might be a bounce on his right cheek, just because. But I don't even think that's the case. Honestly, I'm pretty okay with that. The Sonys are a little bit underexposed. Maybe I'll mess with that, but I'm not even sure I want to mess with that. So let's bring the parade up, and we'll just bring the exposure up, maybe 0.2. That's even too much. So it's 0.1 then. So it's a negligible amount. So the question then becomes, is it worth adding that little tiny bit of exposure at the risk of breaking the thing? I'm saying yes. I'm saying probably. So I gotta say, maybe it's the euphoria of the fact that I've been locked in my own apartment for a week, losing my faculties because of the, that 3-year-long illness that everybody's experiencing. But I gotta say, I'm pretty happy with. All right, so let's go ahead and, well, we know all these are the same. So let's go ahead and, we don't need to do that. We'll just do that. And then we know this and probably this. And so we could do, I don't think that, but we could try that. So that. How did we do? Obviously, I think him sitting in the weeds is going to be a little too hot, but let's look at this. Yes, we'll have to adjust because I think the weeds behind him are a little too, I think the sun's too hot and the weeds are too hot, but if we ignore those, the rest of them I'm pretty confident about. Let's get rid of those. So let's just look at these. Yeah. So, is that a good stopping point for the night? You know, I know that's a weird place to stop it, but at the risk of saying, "Boy, I got lucky," I feel pretty confident about this little adjustment that I did, where all I really realistically did to match this Sony shot right here with this Blackmagic shot is I mean, we can even pull up what I did on the node. It's not much. It's a little bit of a temperature adjustment, so I warmed it up 350. So I warmed it up less than half a Kelvin, right? Is that how that one works? I don't actually know. Hold on. Yeah, that's it. I warmed it up less than half a Kelvin, and I moved the contrast around a little bit. I added contrast, and that's all that I really did. If you were watching this TV show and you weren't specifically trying to see the flaws in it, would you notice a distinct difference in these, other than the fact that I'm seeing the grass behind here is very yellow, and based on the perspective, you don't really see that grass. But other than that, do you really see it? I don't know that I see a big difference. I definitely see an exposure difference, but I'm okay with that, and it kind of makes sense. I might even leave it like that. I won't. I want to see the actors. Yeah, so that's what it is. Matching shots. You know, it can get granular, it can get simple, and sometimes you just are very, very soft hands, and you get lucky. Assuming I come back tomorrow and I'm still okay with this, I feel like I got really lucky. There's also a very, very, very high chance that I come back at this tomorrow and go, oh my God, this is hideous. I completely screwed it up. It's all wrong. That's the name of the game. So yeah, matching shots. Work from the image you have the least amount of control, and whatever you have the most amount of control needs to work to that. So in the case of this, the Sony baked in 709 footage, I basically don't have control over. Everything has to bend to that. So even though the A cam, the better cam, was the better camera, it's going to have to gimp itself and be, you know, the quality of the second camera. That it is what it is. You're only as good as your fastest man, you know, that whole thing. So it was this helpful? Does this make sense to you guys? Catch you the next time. So.